Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me on another of my wonderful interviews. I'm in South Gloucestershire and I'm on the side of a large estate, and I'm joined today by Tracy Worcester. Hello Tracy.
Hi.
Thank you so much for agreeing for me to come and see you, because we're going to have a look at the garden that you're and the farming that you're doing here, that you're very much an exponent of, and very much about farming, not factories. Yes. Factory food, as my audience and I know, are not conducive to health. Mm-hmm. Highly processed foods contain very little minerals and vitamins, and effectively we're going back in time to some of the older ways, which was so much more healthy.
Yes.
And I know you do talks, you run a newsletter, you talk about this and other things, and I want to find out all about it.
Okie dokie.
So we're standing, first of all, let's just position ourselves for the audience. Where are we?
Well, we're in the apple orchard, and it's got 3 beds. Some are for the berries, some are for Jerusalem artichoke, and some are for just the wild bugs and bees that would be very good to go and pollinate in the garden over the wall. And then over there we've got the chickens.
Oh, lovely.
Should we go and see the chickens?
Let's have a look at the chickens.
Okay, so basically we have a campaign called Farms Not Factories, and we make short videos where celebrity chefs or celebrities themselves say why they would never eat or cook with food from a factory farm. And we used to concentrate on pigs, but we're now broadening it out just because the whole system of agriculture has been hijacked by big ag. And what we want people to do is to watch the videos and remember that small-scale farming still exists, but they won't unless people buy the food from a small-scale farmer.
Yes.
Now, obviously, quite a lot of people don't have a small-scale farm themselves, although they could be part of an allotment scheme, or they could buy food on the internet, because supermarkets use organic food as a premium, so they overprice, which obviously induces people to go to the factory farmed food. And we just want people to be aware that the food that's intensively produced is covered in chemicals, and so that's not good. So you've got toxic food. But the other thing is it's fertilized with petrochemicals. So it's a little bit like giving a child sweeties and expecting them, yes, they'll grow, but they won't grow healthy. So you've got to realize that the glyphosate, which is a horrible weed killer, which is in our bread, which is in our rain, which is everywhere, because the farmers have become addicted to it to get rid of the weeds or last year's crop, or the ground, the cover, which they are putting down instead of ploughing. But this is a poison not only to the ecosystem, but to us. And actually, Zach Bush says that the reason why we're getting very overweight as we get older is because actually our body and our digestive system isn't working properly. And we really need to be looking at the glyphosate that's making us hold on to all this fat. We're not actually digesting the food properly. And we need to actually look at food made without chemicals to be healthy. So even though it will cost a little bit more, unfortunately, because the organic farmers haven't externalized their costs onto the broader community, which means that, for example, the pesticides are killing all of the ecosystem. So that cost, where you're not having all of the insects and the species under the soil, is an enormous cost, because you're losing the birds, you're losing for example, here in the garden, you'll see there's a lot of nettles and flowers and what would be called weeds, but they're incredibly important because the insects will eat them and not the crop that we're going to eat.
Right. So that, I mean, that's interesting because people expect farms to look fairly pristine, monoculture-ish, with one or two crops, and they don't see the sort of well, let me describe it as the untidiness that people think of, and yet it's serving a massive task in and of itself by, as you say, diverting the pests over there whilst you're growing over here.
Yes, or even right next door, the sort of companion planting it's called,
Right.
where you have the crop you're going to eat next to the weed that the insect loves. And this sort of farming is actually still thriving in certain parts of the world. For example, in this country, Mugabe has a terrible reputation, even though he freed Zimbabwe from, or it was called Rhodesia, from the whites. So then, we're told, okay, well, he's okay for doing that, but he was terrible with the whites after that. Well, no, he wasn't terrible. All he was saying is that the Lancaster Agreement said that the people of Zimbabwe should have their land back. And he was saying, you know, you white farmers, I can't control the people anymore. They want their land. They want to grow their food. And so that was a sort of revolution. And even Mbeki from South Africa said, we need to do what Mugabe has done, which is to redistribute the land. Because you get these huge monoculture farms.
Right.
And actually it's all export crops. Whereas actually we need to have smaller farms. But in this country too, but in Zimbabwe they do have smaller farms.
And so in going back to this country, we have a lot of landholders and a lot of large-scale farms. And of course, the smaller farms that were doing mixed farming with animals and crops and market gardens and those sort of things have been more and more pushed out from after the war until we see, I mean, where I am down on the south coast, in the spring, it's spring barley, and you just see loads and loads, swathes of it. And people go up on the downs, here's the irony, people go up on the downs and say, oh, doesn't it look lovely? And yet if you read books like Richard Jefferies, who was writing at the end of the 18th century, you realise that actually, well, there wasn't that much farming on the downs itself anyway, other than sheep, and there was loads of sheep. But the wildflowers and the animals that were roaming around were plentiful, and the soil was delightful. And people don't see that. They can't, sometimes they can't see the harm that's been happening to the country.
And there was a great writer at the end of the, I think it was 1700s, called William Cobbold, who said, you know, we used to have small-scale squires that would have a small amount of land and a diverse amount of animals, and people could feed themselves. And it was a really dignified, good way of living. And actually you can see lots of little houses in England scattered all over the place, but nowadays they tend to be lived in by the rich or the second home, or people are really struggling. And we really need to actually have, I would call it a revolution. Where,
A revolution.
yeah, rebels saying, come on,
yes.
we want our land. We can, for example, I have a friend, Monkton Wild Coombe, who has produced the most delicious cheese from a few cows. He uses a scythe. He's brilliant at writing a magazine called The Land. And the trustees of the organization have decided that he's no good and they want him to go. We need people to go onto that land and claim it and say, this belongs to the people. People want to have local food. It is no good saying, oh, we'll just reclaim the land because we need to have solar panels and windmills, and the farmers are no good because their cattle are burping and farting and sending out CO2. It's all a scam. And actually, we're looking at blaming ourselves by saying that it's all anthropogenic. It's all our fault, so put us in a state of fear that the whole planet is going to flood or burn. Actually, they've hijacked the whole narrative. And in fact, we need to be realizing that to continue to mine the fossil fuels which is wrong. I like the fossil fuels to stay in the soil and to have lots of alternative, as much as possible, ways of living that don't rely on a lot of energy. But what they're doing is they're continuing to excavate, and all they're doing is saying to the big businesses, you can continue to pollute, but we'll offset it. And so what they'll do is they'll tell farmers, instead of growing food, you can grow energy. So you can put solar panels or windmills. They're also saying that we're going to have cattle which are climate friendly, so they're going to genetically manipulate these animals so that they can digest in a different way than they've always digested. We're going to have vertical farms, which actually uses a hell of a lot of energy, not only the embodied energy to make it, but to actually cool it and to warm it. And they'll say, oh, it's great because you're going to save 1,000 acres of having to put your food to grow on the soil. We can have it growing with water and a Malteser size bit of clay. You really think that's going to be healthy? Forget it. Yes. It's extremely unhealthy. And also all of these electric cars, they're not going to reduce the number of cars. They're just going to have them electric. So that's another business for big bankers to make lots and lots of money, while we won't have a car because we won't be able to afford these electric cars. So yeah, great if they did fabulous public transport for us, or fabulous bicycle lanes, or of course for people whose trade that they need their van, they need to be allowed to go in their van and not say, no, 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 your van is not compatible with our CO2 friendly world. And all of this also is saying to so-called third world countries, for example, Zimbabwe has done a deal with the United Emirates to say for 1.5 billion, you have got to sequester what we're continuing to sell across the world. So sequestering that will mean that Zimbabwe has to take the land away from the small-scale farmers, from the people who graze their animals. So it's a massive land grab. So what you're seeing actually is a repeat of these giant estates here. We're seeing it continue across the world, and we need to rebel, and we need to look at how our food is grown and buy from the sort of farms that we would like to see exist. And that's very easy.
Let's just walk on a little bit,
yeah,
if that's okay.
Because all that means is you look on the internet and you find people like Big Barn, which is, it's not all, you don't even have to have it organic. It's just, please keep the farmers farming. Because at the moment, they're farming in a way that the supermarkets want them to farm, which is paying them so little that they're still going bankrupt. And we'll carry on only seeing giant factory farms or giant monoculture farms. And then we'll have, oh, climate-friendly wheat. Well, guess what? That's been genetically engineered. So that means it's completely different type of food that we're used to. And for example, we've got this, you can't eat meat anymore. Just the wealthy will eat the meat. And Bill Gates says, if we can't nudge people into eating our patented meat, we can call it fake meat, then we will legislate that people have to eat this fake meat. Well, really, do we want to eat meat where the way to grow meat in a Petri dish is to take a cow that goes to slaughter that's still got a fetus growing in its womb, you cut out the fetus, and those are the cells that grow very fast. That's how you grow that fake lab meat. Or you've got the plant-based meat. Oh, well, that's genetically engineered crops. It's got 13 patents, which means it's totally novel food, and it's highly processed. Healthy? No, it's more junk. So we've got to be really careful that a lot of the message from the Greens of the past that would be advocating for small-scale farms, for mixed farms where there's a proper cycle, where you take the excess, let's say milk from your cattle will go to feed your pigs, and then their manure would be perfect amount for you to move them onto another field the next year. So it's a fertilizer. Whereas in factory farms, you're getting too much manure coming out of those farms, and then they plant it, put it all over the soil of the neighboring fields, which causes excess nitrogen, which then goes into the water systems, and it causes eutrophication, which kills all the fish.
How is it that man, you know, that's been around for what, 250,000 years more or less, has managed to get to the point, say, 100 years ago, where we had the last remnants, I suppose, of mixed farming, where it was sensible farming, small scale. How is it that man has managed to survive, and yet now they're telling us that actually the only way we can survive is with this synthetic, you know, science has come to the rescue of man and is saving us? And yet it seems to me that man has been pretty good at saving himself by not listening to a lot of science and certain narratives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that the people who are choosing to buy organic, you know, you can buy it cheaply by going to the farmers markets or to the local farms, and don't be taken in by this scam of the alternative food. And going vegan, if you want to go vegan, fine, but don't eat that fake meat. Just buy from the local farmers real delicious vegetables. And I just want to broaden it a little bit, because a lot of people kind of go, it's disgusting, I wouldn't want to eat any vegetable that's been sprayed with chemicals. So the industrial sort of ag complex has persuaded the farmers that the only way they can survive is if they do spray this toxic pesticides and fertilizers onto the field. Why is that such a hard, thin thing to imagine, that actually Big Pharma has persuaded the doctors to inject us with something that is equally toxic? And therefore, beware, you know, don't believe that what they're giving you is because they're cruel people and they want to kill you. Just realize that they've also been forced. If they don't want to lose their license, and they've been educated in the university system, which says that Big Pharma is the only way that you can cure yourself. You know, D. Rockefeller in the 40s? Basically, he closed all the natural medicine courses at universities and all of the surgeries for natural medicine, because he wanted to sell medication which came from what he made, which was oil. So we have a system now of medicine which is basically largely toxic. Yes, it's quite good at diagnosis. Yes, it's quite good if you have a car crash and they put you back together again. But beware of all the antibiotics you're being given. Beware of the vaccines that you're being given. You know, just pace yourself. Do your own research.
It's again, I mean, I come back to let's walk round at the
Yeah,
at the
I'm
top
very
here.
happy to walk. We don't fall over.
One of the things that I think is quite interesting again is there's this big push away from, in the narrative, away from herbal remedies, natural remedies, alternative health. And yet I come back to that same point, that we've managed quite well until the Big Pharma came along with all the answers, apparently all the answers. And you're right, you know, certain things have been absolutely miracle cures for people. If you've broken a leg, or, I mean, I've had an eye removed, and they helped me, although I actually found out that if I'd used iodine, I wouldn't have actually lost the eye, but that's another story. But there is obviously some use to this, but the insistence on the one science is fixed, we know the answer. And what you're growing here, with, I can see, and the audience can see in the background, is a whole variety of things. Can you tell me about how food in and of itself is so good for the system, for the body?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's pretty much everything. So if you have a healthy, wholesome diet, which would be organic food, it really would be chemical-free food, and yet they're managed to introduce genetically engineered food without labeling it. So you don't have a choice, it's got to be organic. So it's the only way you know that they haven't been manipulating this Frankenstein food for us to eat. So if you get your local farmer's market, or you go to your, I mean, some of the supermarkets actually have organic food, but I would actually, if you can, avoid the supermarkets, because they're on purpose making the organic more expensive so you don't buy it.
And isn't there a tiers of organic accreditation? Somebody said to me that in the supermarkets, and I can't verify this, that it would be the sort of the very entry level, so enough to call something organic. You pay over the odds for it. Whereas actually, if you go to the farmers markets or to go to a farm and support the farm shops, and I do that, I've boycotted the supermarkets now. I just don't go there. And the thing is, and here's for me the real deal, because everybody says, oh, well, if you do that, it's just so expensive. How can you afford? I eat less, but I eat more. I get more from the food because A, it's healthy. I feel better. I don't feel I've got to keep eating all the time and eating rubbish, because I'm actually nutrient full.
Yeah. Well, I would say eat less meat, but better meat. So
Right.
what you're saying is eat less of everything, but better. And I certainly think that a lot of people are eating a hell of a lot, not getting nutritionally satisfied. So they want to eat more and more, and so their body is suffering as a result. But I would definitely say that if you do walk, if you want me to walk, you lead the walk.
Well, it'd be interesting to go through your polytunnels here, just to vary the landscape.
So I don't think you'd have to eat less
No.
if it's vegetables, because if you get them, either get a box delivered or go to, I'm just trying to think other ways. If you live in the middle of a city, it's very difficult to get a hold of this food, but actually it's quite a lovely day out if you go to the farmer's market and you take the kids and you show them how food could be made, and maybe even do some sort of summer courses so that the children know where the food comes from, because on the whole they don't have a clue.
Well, I think that's the other thing, is that we have, as a nation, and possibly in the West, we've all been dumbed down to not understand what food is, how it grows, the fact that it even comes out of the ground, or what parts. I mean, you know, in the old days, people used to eat all the animal. And now, you know, people are very picky about their meat, and they think, I just have the chicken breast, or I just have that part of the steak. And I mean, I get asked, you know, who eats liver and bacon? Liver and tripe. You know, who eats that anymore? And most people go, oh, golly, I don't like the sound of that. But when I was a kid, we'd always have liver.
Yeah.
It was a staple of the meal. But I can't actually think the last time I've had liver, unless it was in a beef and liver pie or something, which was a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, it's an incredibly healthy diet if it's very diverse.
Yes.
So I think that what they're preparing us to do is that we don't actually grow any food, because if our land is simply covered in solar panels and biofuels to run our electric cars, when it's just all wrong. We need to grow our food locally and have access to a range of food that is affordable and nutritious. And we should be very, very careful of these free trade agreements which our government is signing, which means that food is coming from the other side of the world. I mean, that ridiculous man, Rees-Mogg, suddenly is saying that we should allow hormone-injected beef to come into this country. Well, they're only injected with hormones to make them grow faster.
Right.
Well, I mean, do you really want to eat something which has had hormones in it?
No, not at all.
No, nobody does.
No.
But he's saying, oh, it's protectionism. Well, we don't care if it's protectionism. Let's take that word protection out of the bin.
Yes.
And let's protect our farmers. Let's protect our quality food from cheap imports, which have often been made in conditions that are far lower than we allow in this country. And all he wants to do is to lower our standards too. I don't want that world, and nor does anybody else. We want real farmers to produce real food.
And the fact that stuff comes across the world at any time in the year takes away the joy of seasonality.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, okay, it's lovely that you can perhaps have certain things like spices. They need to come across from the other side of the world.
Yeah.
But I mean, the fact that you've got tomatoes that you can have seasonally, and strawberries which are local, so they're fresh, they've not been frozen. After you.
Yeah.
Just brings back the flavour.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that we are dumbed down with the supermarkets is that we are putting up with flavourless, oh, look at that tomato, flavourless vegetables.
Wrapped in some basil. Have it.
Oh.
Have it with a bit of trace element of soil on it.
Oh, fantastic! Even better. There we go. Now
go.
so basil leaf and a fresh strawberry off the vine.
Strawberry.
What am I talking about? I mentioned strawberries a few seconds ago.
Tomatoes.
Tomato, yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's not a strawberry.
Yeah. No, I mean, food has got to be something that is sort of celebrated and appreciated. It is our health. You've got a bit of a seed going on there.
And the thing, I mean, for me, I am quite passionate about the fact that if you can eat it, excuse me, locally and fresh, and the flavour, I mean, we are dumbed down so much that people don't even know they're eating stuff that is no flavour, which then makes it easier for them to sell you the old synthetic crap, which will be full of over flavours because of all the E numbers and God knows what, and artificial flavouring. But you don't need any of that when you can taste the rich nuances of flavour. I mean, all of that's still in my mouth, that basil on the tomato. What a combination.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very, very scary, this whole net zero climate change narrative, because actually what they're doing is that they're restricting the land available to grow food. And it's almost like if they're going to just be growing energy or rewilding, that means that we won't be providing local food and it'll all be imported. And that's extremely dangerous. We've seen that when we had the lockdown for COVID, where what are we doing? We're having a war with Russia, a proxy war in Ukraine, which is absolutely terrifying and totally unnecessary. And I actually think that the only way that we can stop this is by only buying food from farms that we believe are actually feeding us and are going to look after us for generations to come, rather than putting it down to a system which is called land sparing, which means that the land that's not covered in chemicals for intensive production is then any spare they'll have trees and return to nature. Really what we should have is something called land sharing, where we actually grow food in symbiosis with nature.
Yes.
And every bit of nature is precious, and every bit of the food that we grow is precious, but we can do it in the same system.
And that's what you're doing here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's incredibly important. If we want to revolt, if you possibly can, get a small bit of land. Just get an allotment. Just grow your own food. Please don't trust these politicians. They are, I can't believe what's going on. The way that they are praising Zelensky or praising or going along with the climate change narrative and then silencing, censoring any of the debate around whether we are causing climate change or whether actually it's a natural system. Even if climate change really does happen, we do need to change a little bit, but keep the oil in the soil and just have less stuff. Capitalism is a serious problem, the way it just wants us to consume and consume and consume things that are not necessarily what we need, definitely not produced in a way that's ecologically friendly for us to survive, and particularly for future generations to survive. But we have to take back control, because you cannot trust the corporations, the banksters, or the politicians.
How long have you been, I mean, hang on, I'm just going to move around here. Let's walk up to the other end without treading on any of the wonderful crops that you're growing here. You clearly have been thinking about this, talking about this, and elucidating your ideas left, right and centre. How long have you been on this trailblaze, if I may put it that way?
About 34 years. I used to be an actress, and when I got married I no longer had to earn a living. So it was like freedom. What really, really matters. And that's what the heck we're doing to our planet. And so, you know, every woman who has children, and probably every man too, but I actually think it's more instinctive in women, that we do have to make sure the food is healthy, our planet is healthy, it's healthy for more than one generation. It's like the tribal people say, it's got to be healthy for 7 generations.
Yes.
And everything in our world is just short term. And I think that we're still being herded into cities. And actually we should revolt and say, no, We want to claim back the land. We want to ensure that people who are calling out for support, who are being thrown off their land, get our bodies to sit on that land and demand that that land comes back to us. So local people have real food for really sort of the real price, which is just enough for the farmer and enough for the consumer to buy it, without all these middlemen ratcheting up the price and making it unaffordable, so that people are eating really, really poor quality food from those supermarkets. And they're themselves, frankly, a criminal, but they're just part of the capitalist system, competing with each other to push down the price so we go and buy from them. We need to shun them.
How optimistic are you then, Tracy, for the future, for people to realise what's going on, to wake up and think about, actually, we've got to, save the planet, but not in the way the narrative wants, but in the way that you've been talking about?
I think that we have become so manipulated by our government and by the mainstream media that people are waking up, that there is another way, and the other way is on the internet, that you can find this. And if you're slightly lost, I found all of the contacts that I believe in the journalistic world by going to the Don't Extradite Assange website, because this man has given his life and is now in Belmarsh jail, and the last hearing for his extradition is coming up any week now. And he has journalists who've actually lost their jobs in the mainstream media because they're prepared to say, this man is a hero, and if it's not him being dragged to jail, it'll be us next. So we all have to wake up that our food is being contaminated, our everything, all of these bioweapons, and this jab that is just really, I think it is really very serious in the number of people who are very, very ill from this. And therefore, we have to take back control of our own health, our own food, and our own lives, and ideally get a bit of land, reject that centralized system, and copy what is going on in Zimbabwe, where they do have land. They're not slaves to some mining company or some factory farm. They can actually, because they've got roots and they've got the ability to feed themselves and they've made their own home, they can say, yeah, I'm a carpenter, you pay me the proper price, because it's all gotten too much in the hands of the corporations.
So are you saying that we need to be back to sovereignty, individual sovereignty of ourselves?
Well, yes, individual sovereignty, but actually what would be really good is to realise that we're all in this fight together. And
yes.
They're purposely polarising us to say, oh, I don't like her because she's done this or done. No, let's recognise that our world is being hijacked by an elite cabal of corporate leaders who are psychopaths. And we have to actually realise that human beings are kind, good people. We need to remain human. None of this transgender, transhumanist horror story that we're all objecting to. We need to take back control. And I would say the best way is to try and resist going into the city, come out of the city, demand the land, demand a community. I'm really lucky that the farmer, the head gardener lives with me, the 3 trainees live with me, and the willing workers on organic farms live with me. And because we've got broken extended families and my children won't live in the same house as me, it's like, okay, I have my own family.
Yes.
No, it's because in the West we've lost that culture.
Yes, no, you're quite right. My children are the same.
Yeah.
And it's very sad. In fact, my eldest son will not entertain the thoughts that I have.
Yeah.
And it's very depressing. And but that is the culture. But I do feel optimistic. I feel optimistic when I meet people like yourself who are clearly so immensely passionate and doing your best to spread the word. And I think good will triumph bad. Bad's had a good run for its money, but it's time now we whip the carpet away from all those bad things.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just feel actually that we need to sort of realise what we're about to lose, and then maybe we will wake up and actually grab it before it's too late. At least that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, it is. People who watch your show are ready for action. Well, take action. Follow websites like the Land Workers Alliance, which is the British chapter of Via Campesina, which has 200 million peasants as members. So they're a union, and they get access to government as a result of being a union. And we can join them and we can empower them by buying their food, by financially maybe supporting them if we can afford it, by going and sitting on the land when they demand the land back. There are great examples of this happening all over the world, and we need to do it here too.
And that's what we're going to do. Tracy, thank you so much for talking to me, showing me around what you're doing. We didn't really mention too much of the stuff. What I'm encouraged, I think, is that here we are in October, and a lot of people think, oh, it's going down for the winter, it's the end of the season, and that. But this place is abundant with stuff. And insects, my goodness, we've seen so many ladybirds, have we not? But also butterflies and various things. And it must be good for you with the sun that we've been having recently in October.
Yes.
It will be getting cold, though.
I mean, our tomatoes were they're on their sort of end pick, but all of this, the rainbow chard and the rhubarb and the beetroot and the lettuce and the raspberries, and it's just so delicious. And actually it doesn't cost very much money, and actually it's damn difficult to keep it viable in that we have to actually pay the true cost of food, but not through the supermarkets, because they're obviously on the stock exchange and they've got to pay their dividend holders and they've got to pay their CEOs. Just reconnect direct to your farmer as much as possible, even if it's just through the internet. Receive a box through your door and make those vegetables up yourself and experiment.
Absolutely. There you go. Couldn't have put any of it better myself. Tracy, you've been an absolute star. Thank you so much for letting me have a look round. So there you go. If that hasn't got you up and running, God knows what will. But thank you for watching. I'll be back again with more interviews and monologues, of course. But for now, from Tracy and this wonderful array of marvellous veg, thank you for watching. Till next time, from Tracy and I, goodbye.
Goodbye.